Now, next week, or at least as far as we know at this point, next week, talks are going to happen in Saudi Arabia with obviously Trump, Zelensky, and probably Lavrov. I doubt Putin's going to fly to Saudi Arabia, to be honest. Although, hey, who knows? Those talks are going to happen. And I think we all want to know what on earth is going to happen. Just what on earth is going to happen in these talks. And I will continue to say this now. I think these talks might very well be a non-starter. I am being willing to prove that wrong, but I think these talks are a complete non-starter. Because in the last couple of hours, you've had Trump flip-flop on some of the stuff about Russia, about Ukraine. That is because it's not been reported too much, but there have been widespread protests across the US in favor of Ukraine. But you've also had Republican senators apply, once again, a lot of pressure onto Trump. Because at least a lot of these senators do really recognize the threat that Russia poses, especially Putin's Russia poses. And I wondered what to do about this video, but I think I've already really sort of told you what this video is going to be about. Why I think these peace talks ultimately are probably going to be a non-starter. Because to understand this, you have to understand what the Russian position is going to be in these talks, what they are potentially going to ask for, or even demand. And we know what Ukraine wants. We've done videos about this. Go look at any of my past Ukraine videos, anything like that, where we talk about Ukraine. We've done that to death. The worrying part is Trump, because he bandies the word peace around, like crazy, that the word has real no meaning, to be honest. Because, as I've said this before, peace, but at what price? And what is it exactly, peace actually means? Otherwise, we don't know. And we'll find out probably from these talks as well. But we have to talk about what Russia is going to demand, because this is the topic that does not get discussed a lot, and it shows you the crazy ambitions that Putin has and is not going to give up. This is why Ukraine constantly asks for future security guarantees, because they have been saying since the beginning, they do not want to be fighting this war in 5, 10, 15 years' time again. And that is their biggest worry. That is their biggest worry over this. So before we get into this, please do remember to click the like, share, and of course the subscribe button down below. And of course, as always, there is the Patreon page. There's the Pony Club down below as well. There's the Buy Me Coffee link as well, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, all that good stuff down below. So head on down there to below if you want to help support the channel that way, or you can just click the like and share button. So, reminder, basically, what has Russia's position been since the start of this war? And it is always worth going back to those talks that took place in Turkey, right back at the beginning of this war, where Turkey was acting as an intermediator between these two sides, hoping to, try and get some peace. Because if you look at Turkey's position, it is not in their favor that, Russia gets to take this territory. They don't kind of like Russia having and going in on Ukraine, even though Erdogan has been economically, especially when it comes to oil and gas, quite dependent on Russia. But that's maybe a topic for another time. Um, in those talks, especially, you have to understand what the Russians were pretty much putting forward. First of all, it was very clear that they intended to reinstall um, I can't remember the guy's name, the guy who basically ran to Russia after the Euromaidan, and that they is certainly intended to do some sort, or at least force some sort of um, realignment in Ukraine politics. What they exactly intended to do, we don't know. But they were making talks about, well, the political and the political situation in Ukraine has got to change, and we'll have further talk about that. After we've done this, we'll then have a talk about that. So again, we don't know exactly what that is, but make no mistake, it probably would have been making sure that the pro-Russian party, or at least pro-Russian uh, candidates, got far, far better favorability in any upcoming elections, guaranteed in a potential Ukrainian constitutional change that would be forced on them by Russia. That's worrying in itself. The next, of course, comes to what they actually wanted. Because this has never just been about protecting, quote, the Russian speakers in Ukraine. Because guess what? Most of Ukraine speaks Russian. There was never this going after these Russian people. That never happened. It was Russian propaganda and a big excuse to start this war. They wanted specifically, first of all, for Donbass and Luhansk to become independent regions. Those ultimately, as we've seen already, there would have been a referendum and they would have joined Russia. But make no mistake, that was what we saw. We also saw a defanging of the Ukrainian military, which was cutting them down to something like 65,000 troops. 12 artillery guns, 5 armored cars, 10 tanks, no helicopters, 5 jets. This would not be an army. It would be um, a fly at best that any future Russian invasion would have just been able to bat away. This 3-day incursion was meant to be laid so that, well, Putin could go back and take more of Ukraine at his leisure. However, that did not happen. And it has been obvious that once again, that did not happen. So we move forward now through time from those initial talks that Russia wanted. What have they said since then? Well, certainly they've added 2 more areas. They've added Kherson and Zaporizhia as territories to the Russian Republic. And they want all of that oblast, even though they do not control all of it, because that territory would give them jumping off points to strike further into central Ukraine, even going round to Odessa. And Odessa has been talked numerous times in Russian propaganda about how they're going for Odessa. That, oh boy, they're going to get round to Odessa. Sooner or later, we'll be in Odessa. Make no mistake, they want to take away all of Ukraine's coastline. Why? Because then Russia can pretty much force Ukraine into economic dependence. Because it's still true today. If you want to ship stuff to international markets, you have to have access to the sea, access to ports. And without that access, Ukraine would have to go through Russia, which means that Russia would have pretty much economic control over, Ukraine's future economy. There is still, of course, talks what would happen to, the people in those occupied territories. What's going to happen to them? We still don't know. That's also worrying as well for me. There is still going to be on the table, and what has been happening the last couple of weeks is that a lot of Russian media has been talking about that what is going to be asked for is Ukraine's unconditional surrender. This is the big worry. This is the big worry that Russia goes in there and basically says, we want you to surrender to us unconditionally. Now, what does that mean? Well, just as you may remember in, uh, World War II, it basically gets to mean that Ukraine surrenders and Russia can dictate whatever terms it wants after that. That is what is worrying a lot of people. That next week we may see them go in there, make some crazy more demands about asking for more territory. Just remember, in the north, they wanted Kherson as well. And they may well ask for that as well. They're pushing right now really hard to try and retake that city right now in the north, in Ukraine. They are trying to retake that area. They want to retake that oblast because they want that city as well again. It's Ukraine's second largest city. There is going to be huge problems when it comes to this because Russia wants territory. And it wants that future territory for one reason and one reason alone. So it makes it easier to attack Ukraine again in the future, which is where we come now to security guarantees, because obviously Ukraine is going to ask for that. Now, already, Russia has reiterated this time and time again. There are to be no peacekeepers, no NATO peacekeepers, no peacekeepers whatsoever. That means that if we want to have boots on the ground, like those British, French troops, German troops aren't going to be NATO tagged. They aren't going to be wearing, NATO armbands. They'll be wearing, our flags. And then, once again, it's if they go in, well, okay, we don't have to deal with NATO. All these things that are going to happen next week, we're going to end up talking about them for some time indeed. But it's what crazy things are Russia going to ask for? And trust me, they are going to ask for a lot more. I guarantee you this now. Certainly, they are going to be the first thing I guarantee that's going to happen. They're going to ask for a ceasefire. And to guarantee that ceasefire, they are going to ask Ukraine to give up territory which currently they do not own. That includes the territories of Kherson and Zaporizhia. If that territory is given up under a ceasefire, what this could then allow to do, because Russia has done this before, they stall for time in negotiations, and during that ceasefire moment, they go hunker up in those positions and use those positions as a further jumping off point to go and grab more territory. They have done this before. They did it in Chechnya. They've done it in Georgia. This is, classic Russian stuff. Oh, ask for a ceasefire and then prepare for your next move. While, but why are you moving all those tanks and troops into that? Oh, don't worry. We're just still fulfilling this. Trust me. This is why Ukraine does not trust Russia. Still does not trust Russia, and quite rightly so. But honestly, quite frankly, Trump is going to be played for an absolute fool. He's going to be played for an absolute fool in these talks. But I worry what is going to happen here. But I think these peace talks are a non-starter because Russia is going to ask for stuff that is just complete, utter nonsense, non-starter. I like I say, I doubt this time next week we'll find out, but maybe Sunday, maybe Monday we'll find out more. But yeah, that's what's going to happen next week. But I would expect to see maybe next week Russia put out its aims of what it wants to maybe achieve. And I would not be surprised if it is we want a ceasefire, but in order for the ceasefire to happen, Ukraine has to give up all this land, which we then occupy. Future jumping off points for a further Russian incursion into Ukraine. We'll see what happens, but I am very, very worried. I am very worried about this. Very worried indeed. I honestly don't know what else to say, but I am very worried. I know that sounds, oh, but you're saying you're very worried because there's lots of bad ways this could go. Like I say, these talks could end. You know, Trump and Putin could basically say, "Oh, well, look, Zelensky's being unreasonable." Um, you know, weapon shipments, intelligence sharing from the US has already ended. Does the USA start arming Russia? Do they end all sanctions on Russia? There's so many different ways this can play out. So many different ways this can play out. And unfortunately, it all very, very much ends with Ukraine getting shafted. You know, I I do worry about these talks, but I think these are a non-starter. I think that this is an attempt by Putin to play for time. I think it is an attempt to try and lever somewhat of a strategic advantage in some way. We've seen Russia do this before, but it is worrying. It is very worrying what could happen. And like I say, we'll find out next week. But what did I say a couple of weeks ago? Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Definitely feels like it. So, as always, see you all next time.